The night the twin sisters vanished into the shed, the entire plantation felt as if the world itself had tilted slightly off its axis. It began with a silence so unnatural that even the insects, those relentless nighttime singers, fell quiet, one by one, as though something in the air warned them to hush. A thick, murky fog rolled across the Georgia fields, swallowing the moonlight and wrapping the cabins in a strange, bone-deep chill. No one knew why the overseers had dragged the girls there. No one dared ask. But everybody felt the shift, an invisible tightening in the air, a pressure behind the ribs, the sensation that something ancient and unresolved had awakened. At dawn, when the fog broke apart like torn fabric, two small shapes were carried out of the shed. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They didn't even resist. Their bodies moved like shadows, their bare feet sliding across the earth, as though they no longer belonged to the world they had lived in just hours earlier. And what had been found on them covering their arms, their dresses, their hair, even the soles of their feet spread across the plantation faster than spoken words, faster than fear, faster than fire. Some said it was a curse. Others said it was punishment. But the oldest among the enslaved insisted the same chilling truth. The land remembers, and it never forgets twin blood. Their names were Ada and Alma. They were identical in ways that unsettled people, almost as if they were two halves of one soul. Both had the same narrow face, the same soft jawline, the same dark eyes that carried a quiet intelligence. Yet there was a difference, subtle but unmistakable. Ada moved carefully, as though she feared breaking something unseen. Alma walked with her chin slightly raised, as though she refused to bow to a world determined to crush her. Born in 1833, they grew up on the Hollow Plantation, a place where time never flowed forward but circled endlessly around cruelty. Their mother had been taken from them years earlier, dragged into the same shed, and never seen again. No grave, no explanation, only whispers. Ada remembered the way her mother's hands trembled as she braided their hair one last time. Alma remembered the scar across her mother's palm. Both remembered the scream that split the night after she was taken. Elijah Harlow, the plantation master, claimed he knew nothing about what happened to their mother, but the twins never believed him. Neither did anyone else. The shed itself was spoken of in low voices. It was small, square, and built from pine so old it had turned almost black. Thick boards sealed every seam, leaving only one thin seam of light near the top. The door had no window, only iron hinges that creaked like dying breaths. Nobody entered voluntarily. Those who did seldom walked the same afterward. The week before the incident, strange things started happening across the plantation. The wind blew in sudden directions, carrying with it a scent no one could place. Something sharp, bitter, almost metallic. Lantern flames crackled in odd patterns, burning too tall or too low. Ada swore she heard whispers near the shed at night, voices that sounded like her mother's, yet came from no human throat. Alma felt watched, even in broad daylight, as though invisible eyes followed her every step. By the time Elijah Harlow summoned them, no one was surprised. He stood in the yard with two overseers flanking him, his pale face unreadable. He claimed they had broken a rule, though he never explained which one. Both girls kept silent. Their silence infuriated him. And when he ordered the overseers to tie their wrists with thin ropes meant not to restrain but to burn. Something in the air seemed to recoil, like the land itself shuddered. The twins were taken as the sun dipped low behind the tree line, the sky bleeding orange and red like a wound. Alma looked back, once her eyes burning with a fire Ada recognized. Ada whispered for her to stay calm. Alma whispered back, "This won't end the way he thinks." But once the shed door slammed shut, the world outside lost track of them. Cold seeped into the wood. The fog thickened until even the dogs refused to bark. A faint glow flickered behind the boards, though no lantern had been lit, and the rope around their wrists soaked in their sweat. tightened as if pulled by unseen hands. Samuel, the boy who often hid near the woodpile, spoke later of a sound he heard that night. Not crying, not pleading, something far worse. He said it sounded like skin brushing against skin in a way no human body could move. Like two shadows twisting together. Like rope cutting through something softer than flesh. He ran back to the cabin shaking, swearing the shed itself had breathed. When dawn finally came and the door was opened, the overseers recoiled. Elijah himself stepped forward, his expression contorting for the first time anyone could remember. What covered the girls? What clung to their arms? What smeared their dresses? What dripped slowly onto the dirt was not something any of them had seen before. It was not blood. It was not dirt. It was not ash. It was older, darker, and it smelled like the earth under a grave that had just been opened. Something had happened to the twins in that shed. Something no human hand had done. Something the land had been waiting years to finish. The plantation awoke under a sky that looked bruised, as if the night had struck it, and the dawn had risen too slowly to defend itself. The mist clung to the earth like a warning, refusing to lift even as the first rays of sun pushed their way through the tree line. Those who stepped out from the cabins that morning felt the heaviness instantly, an unnatural stillness, as if the entire property held its breath, waiting for someone brave enough to break the silence. But no one dared speak of what they saw being carried from the shed. Ada and Alma were brought out not by force, but by something far stranger. They walked under their own power, though their bodies moved stiffly, like marionettes tugged by threads no one could see. Their eyes were open, but unfocused. Their dresses hung damp against their thin frames. The ropes around their wrists had loosened as though whatever bound them no longer needed physical restraints. And the substance covering them, dark, glistening, almost alive in the rising light, made even the hardest overseer take a step back. The twins said nothing, not a whisper, not a breath out of rhythm. It was as if the voices that had once belonged to them had been swallowed whole by the night. Elijah Harlow walked behind them, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. He did not touch them. He did not order the overseers to touch them. He simply stared at the substance smeared across their arms, their necks, their hair. His jaw clenched once, then again. It was the first time anyone had seen fear flicker across his face. A tiny, almost imperceptible break in his composure, like a crack in polished stone that hinted at weakness beneath the surface. Around them, whispers began to spread through the plantation, slipping through the spaces between cabins like wind through broken shutters. Some said the twins had angered the spirits that lived beneath the land. Others insisted the shed was cursed, especially since the day their mother disappeared inside it. The old ones, the ones with memories too deep to speak aloud, exchanged glances, heavy with dread. And the few who had once believed in miracles, crossed themselves quietly and avoided looking in the direction of the shed altogether. The plantation itself felt different that day. The fields, usually bright under the morning sun, appeared muted, almost gray. The cotton plants bowed as if burdened by weight they had never carried before. The air tasted of iron and damp soil. Even the trees surrounding the property seemed off. They leaned slightly toward the shed, as though drawn to something within it, something they recognized in a way humans could not. The shed had always been a scar on the land, but now it pulsed with a darker energy, as if the night had left something behind. The boards looked darker than usual, soaked in dew or perhaps something else entirely. The hinges, rusted and heavy, felt strangely warm to the touch. And the ground around the entrance showed no footprints except the twins, a detail that made the overseers uneasy, though they pretended not to notice. Inside the cabins, the enslaved murmured prayers under their breath. Mothers held their children closer. Men sharpened small tools, not for rebellion, but simply to keep their hands from shaking. Samuel crouched by the doorway of his cabin, staring at the shed, remembering the shadows he had seen crawling across the floor beneath the door the night before. He had told no one. He knew no one would believe him. Or worse, they would believe him too much. As the day unfolded, the fog lifted unevenly, revealing parts of the plantation in fragments. The hog pens materialized first, then the far fence line, then the barren patch where torches had once been set for punishment. But the shed remained shrouded long after everything else emerged. As if whatever had happened inside, it demanded secrecy even after daylight arrived. Elijah ordered the twins to be taken to the small washroom behind the main house. It was one of the few places where enslaved people were brought only when needed, usually after severe punishments, to clean blood or dirt before being sent back to work. But today, it was different. Elijah didn't order the overseers to scrub them. He didn't order their dresses burned. He didn't order new clothes. He simply said, in a voice tight and low, "Wash them. Do not speak to them." Then he left. And the overseers, usually so quick to assert their dominance, obeyed in complete silence. The water in the basin turned dark instantly, swirling into a murky black-red color that made one of the men cross himself. But the substance clinging to the twins did not come off easily. It stuck to their skin like something grown, not applied. The smell rising from the water was faint but unmistakable earthy, ancient, like soil freshly dug after years of being left untouched. Ada blinked once as the water poured over her arms, but said nothing. Alma stared straight ahead at the wall, her face expressionless, her chest rising and falling with quiet, measured breaths. When the overseers finished, they backed out of the room quickly, their steps hurried despite their attempts to remain stoic. One of them whispered as he closed the door, "Those girls ain't alone." Something followed him out. By midday, the story had spread everywhere. People speculated. People feared. But no one asked the twins what happened, not because they didn't want answers, because they sensed the truth was something the living had no right to hear. And as the sun began to set again, bleeding red into the horizon like a warning, the shed door creaked softly in the wind, almost as if something inside had shifted, something that wasn't finished yet. Ada and Alma were taken back to their cabin after being washed, but nothing about their return resembled the quiet, familiar rhythm of everyday exhaustion. They walked side by side, as they always did. Yet there was a strange disconnect in the way their shoulders no longer touched, the way their steps no longer aligned. The rope burns across their wrists remained raw, red, and swollen, yet neither seemed to feel them. Their eyes, once full of a curious and secret brightness, now looked hollow, like two dark wells reflecting only the shadows around them. Their cabin, a cramped structure of warped boards and a leaking roof, felt too small to contain them. Ada entered first, pausing just past the threshold, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Alma followed, her gaze drifting to the corner where their mother once sat, humming softly into the night. The melody came back to her in fragments, the rise and fall of the tune, the warmth of her mother's breath on her forehead. But the comfort it once carried now felt fractured, distant. Children playing nearby stopped mid-laugh as they passed. A young girl dropped her rag doll. A teenage boy stepped aside, his face tightening with fear. No one dared get close to the twins. Not after seeing what the overseers had scraped from their skin. Not after hearing the whispers about the shed. And definitely not after witnessing the way the land itself seemed to quiet around the girls, as if listening. Inside the cabin, the twins sat opposite each other on their straw-stuffed mattress. Alma reached for Ada's hand, and for a moment, their fingers brushed. They had always taken comfort in one another's presence, but now something invisible pulsed between them, an unspoken truth neither was ready to voice. Ada broke the silence first. "What did they see on us?" She whispered, though her voice trembled in a way that suggested she didn't want the answer. Alma stared at her hands, turning them slowly as if expecting to find a substance still there. "I don't know," she said, "but I felt something in that shed." something I didn't know could exist. Ada looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Alma inhaled deeply, her breath catching. It was like the walls were breathing, like something moved behind them. Something old. Something angry. Ada shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut. She had always been the more fragile one, the one who tried to make sense of pain in quiet ways. Alma, strong-willed and stubborn, carried her emotions like a hidden weapon. But both still lived beneath the shadow left by their mother's disappearance. And now, whatever had touched them in the shed had reopened wounds they thought time had buried. Ada, Alma said softly. I think Mama was there. The words sliced the air between them. Ada recoiled slightly, horror flickering across her face. Don't say that. I felt her, Alma insisted, leaning forward. Not her body, her presence. Like she was trying to warn us. Ada's breath hitched. Memories flooded her, her mother brushing her hair gently, the lullabies that soothed her nightmares, the last glance she gave before the shed swallowed her whole. Ada had tried for years to forget that moment, to bury the sound of their mother's scream, the one that tore through the night like a blade. But it always found its way back. Outside, footsteps approached. The voices of two overseers drifted through the thin walls. They ain't speaking, one muttered. Good, the other replied. Hollow says their silence means they're still scared. But silence was not fear. Not this time. Ada and Alma exchanged a glance, one filled not with terror, but with something the plantation had never seen in them before. Awareness. A recognition that whatever had happened in that shed had changed them in ways they didn't yet understand. Alma's hands trembled as she traced the rope burns on Ada's wrists. It didn't hurt, she whispered. Not like it should have. Something numbed it. Ada shuddered. Something touched us. Their connection had always been uncanny. They felt each other's pain, finished each other's thoughts, dreamed the same dreams. But now, the bond seemed altered deeper, sharper, as if weighted with something they hadn't chosen. Suddenly, Ada's eyes widened. Do you hear that? Alma stiffened, listening. The sound was faint, barely audible above the distant clatter of tools and the rustle of leaves. It was a low hum, vibrating through the floorboards like a heartbeat buried beneath the earth. It's coming from the shed, Ada said. No, Alma whispered. It's coming from us. Both girls froze. Neither blinked. The hum grew louder, no longer faint, no longer distant. It pulsed inside their ribs, a rhythm that did not belong to their own heartbeats. It felt familiar, terrifying, ancient. Ada clutched her chest. It's Mama. Tears gathered in Alma's eyes, not of fear, but of understanding. She never left, she said. The shed didn't take her. The land did. Outside, the sky darkened again as clouds rolled in unnaturally fast, swallowing the sunlight whole. A storm was coming. Not one woven from wind and rain, but one born from a truth too heavy for the living to hold. The twins sat together, hands trembling, bodies rigid, waiting for the hum to reveal what it wanted. It would not keep them waiting long. The sky cracked open with the first distant rumble, just as the sun began to sink behind the tree line, drowning the plantation in a strange half-light that felt neither day nor night. Workers were rushed indoors early, overseers muttering under their breath about the storm. But the twins knew better. This was no weather of the natural world. The hum inside their bodies had grown stronger, vibrating their bones, tightening their breath, spreading warmth and cold in alternating waves that made their skin crawl. They tried to remain still, tried to ignore it, but every heartbeat seemed to echo with a message they couldn't quite understand. Alma, Ada whispered, her voice trembling. It's getting louder. Alma pressed a hand to her chest. It wants something. I can feel it pulling. Ada shook her head violently. No, we're not going back there. But as night drew closer, the shed seemed to call them not with sound, but with presence. Every time Ada blinked, she saw it in her mind. The rotting boards, the rusted hinges, the thin slit of moonlight at the top. Alma felt the pull too, sharp and relentless, like a thread wound around her ribs drawing tighter with every passing second. As the wind began to howl, twisting the branches of the pecan trees and rattling loose boards across the cabins, Samuel ran to their door and slammed it shut behind him. His chest heaved, his hair plastered to his forehead from the sudden gusts outside. "You need to listen," he gasped, his voice so frantic it barely escaped his throat. "Something's happening to the ground behind the shed. I saw it. I swear I did." The dirt, it moved. Ada's eyes widened. Alma rose to her feet, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What do you mean moved?" Alma asked. Samuel swallowed. "Like something under it was trying to get out." Ada stepped back, her face draining of color. No, we're not going there." "Not again." Alma placed a hand on her sister's arm. "If Mama is there, if she's trapped..." "Trapped?" Ada snapped. "Or keeping us trapped." The wind screamed outside, violently bending the trees until their branches scraped the earth. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking dust from the cabin ceiling. Samuel shook his head. "The overseers ain't near the shed. They're all in the main house. They're scared, too. They just won't say it." Alma moved to the window and peered through the cracked shutter. The shed stood alone in the clearing, swallowed in darkness, except for a faint red glow flickering beneath the door. Too dim to be lamplight, too alive to be anything safe. Ada forced herself to look too, and when she did, her breath caught. For a split second, she saw a figure along distorted, hunched move across the gap between the shed and the tree line. But when she blinked, it vanished. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Alma didn't answer. She was already stepping away from the window, her eyes glassy, distant. The pull in her chest had grown unbearable, like a hand reaching from underground, gripping her heart, dragging her toward the shed. "No," Ada said again. "You are not going out there." But Alma kept walking. Ada grabbed her wrist hard, but the moment their skin touched, a surge of heat shot through both of them. Alma gasped. Ada screamed. Samuel stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. Their connection, the twin bond that had always been a quiet thread, now burned like rope pulled through fire. Ada fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "Alma, please, stop." Alma trembled, but the unseen call tightened its grip. "I have to go," she whispered. "If we don't, something worse will happen." The cabin door burst open with a violent gust, throwing dust and straw into the air. The storm had begun in full, but not a drop of rain fell, only wind, whipping the world into chaos. Alma stepped outside. Ada forced herself to rise, tears streaming, and followed her into the roaring night. Samuel stayed in the doorway for a moment, torn between fear and helpless loyalty. Then he followed too, his small frame nearly knocked over by the fury of the wind. The path to the shed felt longer than ever. Each step seemed to sink into the earth, as though the ground softened beneath them intentionally. The glow under the shed door grew brighter as they approached, a pulsing red that illuminated the mud like veins under human skin. Ada grabbed Alma's arm again. This time, Alma stopped. "Ada, I'm scared," she whispered. The storm calmed. Instantly, the wind died. The trees froze mid-motion. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, a low moan vibrated from beneath the shed. Not human, not animal, something between. The ground rippled outward in a slow, deliberate wave, as though something beneath it had shifted its weight. Ada's voice broke into a whimper. "Alma, what if it isn't Mama?" Alma's eyes filled with tears, but there was fire in them too. "Then we face it together." The shed door creaked open. By itself, a long, thin hand skeletal trembling appeared at the edge of the floorboards inside. Samuel screamed. Ada grabbed Alma's hand. The red glow washed over them, and the true horror of that night finally began to reveal itself. The whisper, "Daughters." hung in the air like a blade suspended above their throats, humming with an energy older than language itself. Alma froze, her breath trapped in her chest, the word crawling beneath her skin like a memory too vivid to be imagined. Ada lay trembling at her feet, her eyes wide, unblinking, staring into a world that no longer obeyed logic or mercy. Samuel pressed himself against the ground, covering his ears, rocking back and forth, as though trying to shake himself awake from a nightmare that refused to loosen its grip. The creature, if creature it was, took another trembling step forward. Soil fell in clumps from its body, revealing slivers of fabric beneath, scraps of a dress patterned with faint, almost invisible stitching that Ada and Alma recognized instantly. Their mother's dress. The realization struck them like lightning to the spine. Alma staggered toward the figure, each step uncertain, as though moving through water thickened with grief. Ada reached up weakly, her voice cracking. "No, Alma, stop." But Alma couldn't stop, not now, not after years of silence, not after nights begging the darkness to return even the faintest trace of the woman who had vanished behind the shed door so long ago. The creature tilted its head again, soil shedding from its cheek to reveal a hint of brown skin beneath, stretched and hardened like bark. The mouth opened slightly, enough for another whisper to escape. "Help!" Alma broke. She fell to her knees, sobbing, reaching for the outstretched hand. Her fingers hovered just inches away from the creature's twisted knuckles when the pit of bones behind the shed convulsed again, this time more violently. The ground split wider, sending small stones skittering across the soil. The outline of the woman formed more clearly, ribcage rising and falling with the rhythm of a breath that should not exist. Ada forced herself upright, her body shaking uncontrollably. She grabbed Alma's shoulder. "That's not Mama," Ada whispered. "Mama wouldn't ask us for help like that." Alma looked torn, her face streaked with tears, her chest heaving. "But Ada," she said, "daughters." And everyone on this land said Mama screamed. Everyone said she cried. "Did you hear that thing cry?" Ada snapped, her voice trembling with equal parts terror and rage. "It's copying her, Alma. It's wearing her like a memory." The words struck Alma hard enough to make her flinch. Behind them, Samuel whimpered, "Something else is coming." He was right. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold all at once. Frost crept over the edge of the shed door. The pit of bones stilled. Even the red glow began to pulse slower, darker, like a heartbeat slipping into its final beats. Then, the creature lunged. It didn't run. It glided, dragged forward by an unseen force, arms outstretched, fingers twitching violently. Alma screamed, stumbling back. Ada pulled her away, nearly falling as the creature's hand sliced through the air where Alma's face had been only a heartbeat before. The storm outside roared back, wind ripping across the clearing, slamming debris against the shed walls. The trees bent so low their branches scraped the ground like talons clawing at the earth. Ada and Alma ran. But the creature pursued, not clumsy, not limping, but with a horrifying speed that defied its collapsing form. Its joints cracked with every movement, bending in ways human joints could not. Its mouth opened wider, revealing soil-packed teeth, dripping mud with every breath. Alma tripped on a tree root, collapsing into Ada's arms. The creature seized the moment and lunged again, its fingers grazing Alma's ankle. Alma cried out, the touch sending a cold shock through her leg, freezing her calf instantly, turning her skin pale as bone. "No!" Ada screamed, kicking the creature hard. Her foot connected with its chest, solid, cold, wrong. The creature staggered, but did not fall. It tilted its head again, observing Ada with an unnatural calm. Then it spoke, but the voice was not their mother's. It was deeper, darker, layered with centuries of trapped breath. "Return." Ada's heart dropped into her stomach. The word vibrated the air itself, swirling dust into spirals around them. Alma's voice trembled. "Return. What? The creature's head snapped toward the pit of bones. Ada understood before Alma did. They want us, she whispered. Not Mama, us. The ground convulsed again, this time cracking open fully, revealing an entire cavity beneath the shed. A massive burial pit hidden for decades, filled with more bones than 2 girls could ever count. Some were small children's bones. Some were large, twisted. Some looked as though they had clawed upward before settling back into eternal stillness. The truth struck Alma like a blow. All the ones who disappeared. She whispered. All the ones they said ran away. Ada nodded, tears streaming. They never left. The land took them. The creature lunged again, but this time its body began to collapse mid-movement. Soil slid from its back in heavy slabs. Its arms split, its torso cracked. The outline of the woman inside it, if a woman truly existed there, flickered like a dying flame. And from the pit behind it, dozens of skeletal fingers clawed upward. Ada screamed. Alma dragged her back. Samuel bolted toward the tree line, tripping over roots but pushing himself up desperately, crying their names. The creature reached for the twins one last time. Then its chest split open with a violent crack. A wave of force exploded outward, knocking the twins to the ground. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from inside the creature's broken torso, a second whisper, "Run!" And this time, the voice was their mother's. The twins froze. The creature collapsed into the dirt. The pit of bones began to rise, and dawn was still hours away. The whisper, "Daughters," hung in the air like a blade suspended above their throats, humming with an energy older than language itself. Alma froze, her breath trapped in her chest, the word crawling beneath her skin like a memory too vivid to be imagined. Ada lay trembling at her feet, her eyes wide, unblinking, staring into a world that no longer obeyed logic or mercy. Samuel pressed himself against the ground, covering his ears, rocking back and forth, as though trying to shake himself awake from a nightmare that refused to loosen its grip. The creature, if creature it was, took another trembling step forward. Soil fell in clumps from its body, revealing slivers of fabric beneath. Scraps of a dress patterned with faint, almost invisible stitching. Stitching that Ada and Alma recognized instantly. Their mother's dress. The realization struck them like lightning to the spine. Alma staggered toward the figure, each step uncertain, as though moving through water thickened with grief. Ada reached up weakly, her voice cracking. "No. Alma, stop." But Alma couldn't stop, not now. Not after years of silence. Not after nights begging the darkness to return even the faintest trace of the woman who had vanished behind the shed door so long ago. The creature tilted its head again, soil shedding from its cheek to reveal a hint of brown skin beneath, stretched and hardened like bark. The mouth opened slightly, enough for another whisper to escape. "Help!" Alma broke. She fell to her knees, sobbing, reaching for the outstretched hand. Her fingers hovered just inches away from the creature's twisted knuckles when the pit of bones behind the shed convulsed again, this time more violently. The ground split wider, sending small stones skittering across the soil. The outline of the woman formed more clearly, ribcage rising and falling with the rhythm of a breath that should not exist. Ada forced herself upright, her body shaking uncontrollably. She grabbed Alma's shoulder. "That's not Mama," Ada whispered. "Mama wouldn't ask us for help like that." Alma looked torn, her face streaked with tears, her chest heaving. "But Ada," she said, "daughters." And everyone on this land said Mama screamed. Everyone said she cried. "Did you hear that thing cry?" Ada snapped, her voice trembling with equal parts terror and rage. "It's copying her, Alma. It's wearing her like a memory." The words struck Alma hard enough to make her flinch. Behind them, Samuel whimpered, "Something else is coming." He was right. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold all at once. Frost crept over the edge of the shed door. The pit of bones stilled. Even the red glow began to pulse slower, darker, like a heartbeat slipping into its final beats. Then, the creature lunged. It didn't run. It glided, dragged forward by an unseen force, arms outstretched, fingers twitching violently. Alma screamed, stumbling back. Ada pulled her away, nearly falling as the creature's hand sliced through the air where Alma's face had been only a heartbeat before. The storm outside roared back, wind ripping across the clearing, slamming debris against the shed walls. The trees bent so low their branches scraped the ground like talons clawing at the earth. Ada and Alma ran. But the creature pursued, not clumsy, not limping, but with a horrifying speed that defied its collapsing form. Its joints cracked with every movement, bending in ways human joints could not. Its mouth opened wider, revealing soil-packed teeth, dripping mud with every breath. Alma tripped on a tree root, collapsing into Ada's arms. The creature seized the moment and lunged again, its fingers grazing Alma's ankle. Alma cried out, the touch sending a cold shock through her leg, freezing her calf instantly, turning her skin pale as bone. "No!" Ada screamed, kicking the creature hard. Her foot connected with its chest solid, cold, wrong. The creature staggered, but did not fall. It tilted its head again, observing Ada with an unnatural calm. Then it spoke, but the voice was not their mother's. It was deeper, darker, layered with centuries of trapped breath. "Return." Ada's heart dropped into her stomach. The word vibrated the air itself, swirling dust into spirals around them. Alma's voice trembled. "Return." "What?" The creature's head snapped toward the pit of bones. Ada understood before Alma did. "They want us," she whispered. "Not Mama, us." The ground convulsed again, this time cracking open fully, revealing an entire cavity beneath the shed, a massive burial pit hidden for decades, filled with more bones than two girls could ever count. Some were small children's bones. Some were large, twisted. Some looked as though they had clawed upward before settling back into eternal stillness. The truth struck Alma like a blow. All the ones who disappeared. She whispered. "All the ones they said ran away." Ada nodded, tears streaming. "They never left. The land took them." The creature lunged again, but this time its body began to collapse mid-movement. Soil slid from its back in heavy slabs. Its arms split, its torso cracked. The outline of the woman inside it, if a woman truly existed there, flickered like a dying flame. And from the pit behind it, dozens of skeletal fingers clawed upward. Ada screamed. Alma dragged her back. Samuel bolted toward the tree line, tripping over roots but pushing himself up desperately, crying their names. The creature reached for the twins one last time. Then its chest split open with a violent crack. A wave of force exploded outward, knocking the twins to the ground. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from inside the creature's broken torso, a second whisper, "Run!" And this time, the voice was their mother's. The twins froze. The creature collapsed into the dirt. The pit of bones began to rise, and dawn was still hours away. The figure's fingers curled weakly, trembling, trying to form a gesture that had comforted the twins since childhood, a soft beckoning motion, the one their mother used each night to call them into her arms. But the movement broke partway through, jerking violently, as though invisible chains dragged the hand in a different direction. Ada's heart split. "It's not her, Alma." "Not anymore." But Alma's tears fell freely now, splashing onto the wet earth. She tried to warn us. She tried to help us escape. And this land took her. The creature's body convulsed again. Soil fell away in chunks, revealing more of the dress beneath, the faded blue flowers, the torn hem Alma had once mended as a child. For a moment, Ada's breath caught. Something familiar flickered behind the dead black eyes, pain, recognition, maybe even love. But then the bones in the pit screamed. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of centuries of suffering expelled in one violent exhale. The shed collapsed inward. The earth cracked open beneath it, splitting wider, forming a jagged mouth in the dirt. Skulls rolled forward, colliding with femurs and ribs as the pit grew deeper. Something vast and unseen shifted below, its movement sending waves through the soil like a beast turning beneath a blanket of earth. Samuel's voice echoed faintly from the distance. "Alma! Ada!" Ada grabbed Alma's hand again. "We need to run to him." "Alma, listen to me, please." But Alma wasn't listening anymore. She was staring directly into the chasm, her expression changing, not to fear, but to understanding. Deep, unsettling understanding. "Ada," she whispered. "It wasn't calling us to hurt us." Ada shook her head, crying. "Yes, it was. Alma, look at it. Look." No, it was calling us home. The words left Alma's mouth like a confession, and the moment they did, a new hum surged through both sisters, stronger than before, stronger than anything. The wind bent backward, sucking toward the pit. Soil tore upward. The dead reached higher. Ada screamed, but Alma stood still, her eyes blazing with something that terrified her sister even more than the creatures rising from the ground. "Acceptance." "No," Ada whispered. "No, Alma, don't you dare." "Don't you dare." Alma finally turned to her sister, tears trembling on her lashes. "We were born from this land, Ada. Mama was taken by it, and whatever is down there. It wants us because we're the only ones who can finish what she started." Thunder cracked. Lightning struck the shed, igniting the collapsed structure. Alma took one step toward the pit. Ada lunged after her, grabbing her arm, and the earth pulled. The force was so violent, Ada's feet left the ground. She screamed, holding Alma with all her strength. Their hands slipped. Alma's fingers clawed desperately at Ada's skin, but the pull was too strong. Soil rose in a cyclone, swirling around Alma's ankles, gripping tighter like hands made of earth. "Ada, let me go." "No, you have to. One of us has to go." Ada's sob broke into a scream. "Alma!" The ground swallowed Alma up to her knees. Bones clattered around her. A skull cracked open against her thigh. The hum reached a deafening pitch. Samuel erupted from the tree line, sprinting toward them, shouting their names. "Ada! Grab her! Don't let go!" Ada held on until her arms burned, until her fingers went numb, until the earth tore Alma from her grasp with a final violent jerk. Alma's last words echoed above the storm. "Ada, run!" Then the ground consumed her. The pit slammed shut. The storm stopped. Silence fell. And Ada collapsed onto the soil, hands shaking, staring at the earth that had just taken her sister. Samuel reached her, falling to his knees beside her, his chest heaving, tears streaking through mud on his face. "Ada, Ada, look at me." But Ada couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The ground beneath her trembled once, just once, as if whispering a promise, not finished. The forest swallowed Samuel's screams as he ran, but Ada and Alma could barely hear him over the sound rising. From the earth, an impossible chorus of bone and soil grinding together as though the dead themselves were clawing their way toward the surface. The ground beneath the shed pulsed like a living thing, each throb sending vibrations through the twins' feet, rattling their bones, synchronizing with that same unnatural hum that had haunted them since the dawn. Ada pulled Alma to her feet. The world around them spun, blurred by tears, smoke, and the faint red glow still leaking from the cracks beneath the shed. The air had grown thick, suffocating, as if the night itself were closing in on them, pressing them toward the open pit. "Ada," Alma whispered, barely able to breathe. I can hear them." "Hear who?" Ada cried, choking on fear. All of them. It was true. The voices were everywhere now, low at first, rumbling like thunder deep underground, then rising, splitting into 1,000 fractured whispers overlapping into one horrific plea. "Return, return." A voice for every body in the pit. a voice for every soul Elijah Harlow had buried under decades of silence. As the bones began to rise, ribs, skulls, arms, entire spines lifting from the earth like puppets pulled by invisible strings, the air shifted. The storm ruptured above them, wind spiraling in a tight circle around the clearing, forming a boundary they could not cross. Rain finally fell, long, cold, needle-like drops, but instead of hitting the ground, the water evaporated inches above the soil, as if the earth refused any cleansing. Ada grabbed Alma's wrist. "We have to run. Now." But Alma wasn't looking at the pit anymore. She was staring at the collapsed creature, a hollow shell wearing the remnants of their mother's dress. The soil-coated body twitched, a single hand lifting toward them. Ada screamed, pulling Alma back, but Alma stepped forward, her breath quivering. "Mama," she whispered. He swallowed. "Sir." Elijah turned away. "Throw it back in. No one speaks of this. Not to me. Not to anyone." The bone dropped into the earth with a dull, final sound. They finished the burial by sundown. Where the shed had once stood, there was now only a flat, raw patch of land, tamped down and dusted with lime. To anyone passing by in the future, it would look like any other piece of ground. Only the earth itself would remember what lay beneath. Back in the cabins, old Mabel, who had worked the Harlow land longer than most of the overseers had been alive, sat beside Ada on the edge of the straw mattress. Ada stared at her hands, still feeling the echo of Alma being torn away from her, still feeling the bite of soil around her fingers. As she dug for a sister, the land refused to give back. Mabel laid a wrinkled hand on her shoulder. "Child, look at me." Ada didn't move. "Look at me," Mabel repeated, voice soft but firm. Ada finally lifted her eyes. They looked over, emptier, as if whatever light had once lived in them had been swallowed whole. "That ground been hungry for a long time," Mabel said quietly. "It took your mama, took others before her. It ain't right, but it's real. Some of us die by the whip, some by fever, some by the earth that ain't ours, but still got claim on us." Ada's voice came out broken. She didn't have to go. Alma didn't have to. She chose, Mabel cut in gently. You held on. You fought. The land wanted both of you, and she made sure it only got one. Tears blurred Ada's vision. Why? Mabel's gaze drifted toward the direction of the buried shed. 'Cause someone had to live to tell it, to remember where the bones is, to remember what they did. Outside, the bell rang for evening rations. No one moved at first. The air in the cabins felt thick with unspoken grief, a grief too large to fit inside bodies that had already endured more than their share. When they finally stepped into the yard, they did so quietly, eyes drifting toward the far end of the property where the shed used to be. Now, there was nothing there but bare earth. Ada felt the hum again. Faint this time. Not angry. Not demanding. Just present. A reminder. She pressed a hand against her chest. Alma was gone, swallowed whole by a grave carved beneath a punishment meant to break, not bury. But their mother's last whisper still lingered in Ada's ears. Run. Run from what? The plantation? The truth? The weight of being the one left behind? Elijah watched from the porch, eyes sweeping over the enslaved faces lined up for food. His gaze lingered on Ada. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what he was looking at. A broken girl? A threat? A witness? He turned away. He could bury the shed. He could silence his overseers. He could pretend the land was clean. But he could not undo what the earth had already taken. They'd buried the shed before they buried the story. By midday, Elijah Harlow had ordered every able-bodied man on the plantation to bring shovels, boards, and lime. No one was allowed near the clearing except overseers. Ada was dragged back to the cabins, her legs too weak to carry her, her fingers still curled as if they were still clinging to Alma's wrists. Samuel stayed at her side until an overseer struck him and sent him stumbling away. Elijah stood at the edge of the cracked earth, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. He refused to look directly at the place where the pit had sealed shut. Instead, he fixated on the broken remains of the shed, still smoldering from the lightning strike, its charred boards staining the air with the stench of burnt resin and old rot. "Cover it," he said. One of the overseers hesitated. "Sir, the ground. Cover it." His tone left no room for questions. They worked without speaking. Shovels sliced into the soil, carving away the top layer, flattening, packing, forcing the land back into a shape that lied. Some of the men swore they heard faint noises beneath their feet, a muffled thudding, a distant scratching, but no one dared acknowledge it. Elijah's presence held their tongues in place. As the hole disappeared beneath layers of fresh dirt, one of the men's shovels struck something hard. He froze, knuckles turning white around the handle. Slowly, he scraped away the soil until a fragment of bone emerged, pale, smooth, unmistakably human. Days turned into weeks. Weeks bled into months. The storm that had torn through the plantation the night Alma was taken became something people spoke of only in practical terms. The night the trees nearly snapped. The night the roof of the far cabin came loose. The night Harlow made everyone work double to fix the damage. No one mentioned the shed. No one mentioned the pit. No one mentioned the twins. Because there was only one twin now. Ada moved through her days like a ghost that hadn't realized her body was still alive. She worked when ordered, ate when told, slept when exhaustion forced her. But the rhythm that had once connected her to Alma, the quiet look, the shared breath, the wordless understanding, was gone. Every movement felt incomplete, as if half of her had been carved out and buried in a place she would never be allowed to visit. At night, she dreamed of the ground. Not just the patch where the shed had stood, but the entire plantation. In her dreams, every step left a glowing footprint, and beneath each one, hands reached up from the soil, fingers stretching, grasping, begging to be acknowledged. Sometimes she saw Alma among them, her face calm, her eyes steady. "Don't come down here," Alma would say in those dreams. "Just don't let them forget I did." Samuel grew quieter after that night. He no longer ran or laughed or carved shapes into the dirt with sticks. He spent his evenings sitting at the edge of the cabins, staring toward the buried shed. When others tried to pull him away, he shook them off. "They think it's over," he muttered once, more to himself than anyone else. But the ground still ain't flat enough. He was right. No matter how carefully the overseers had tamped down the soil, no matter how many times, Elijah ordered the field hands to rake it smooth, the patch where the shed had stood never looked like the rest of the yard. Grass refused to grow there. Rainwater sat in shallow puddles, no matter how dry the surrounding earth became. On cold mornings, frost lingered longer over that rectangle of land, like a shroud reluctant to lift. Word spread quietly from cabin to cabin. "Don't step there if you can help it. Don't walk across it at dawn. Don't look at it too long when the sky is gray." Years later, new people would be brought to Hollow Ford, faces who didn't know the story, bodies that hadn't yet been pushed to the brink. But even they sensed something was wrong with that piece of ground. Animals avoided it. Children cried if forced to cross it. Once, a horse broke its leg when its hoof sank several inches into a patch of seemingly solid earth right at its center. Elijah tried to control the narrative. When visitors came, he called it the bad patch, claimed the soil there had simply gone sour, unfit for crops or structures. He laughed off suggestions to build something on it, to cover it with a small barn or a smokehouse. "Some land just ain't meant to stand under a roof," he said. Deep down, he knew better. Late at night, he would stand at his office window and look toward the buried shed, watching how the moonlight never seemed to fall quite right there, as if bending away. More than once, he thought he saw two figures standing on that patch just before dawn. Two girls side by side, their heads slightly bowed, their dresses stirring in a wind that hadn't yet reached the rest of the field. Every time he blinked, they disappeared. But the memory stayed, On the 10th anniversary of the night, Alma vanished. Ada woke before the bell. On the 10th anniversary of the bell. She hadn't meant to, but something tugged her from sleep. A familiar pull, softer now, but unmistakable. Her chest tightened. Her palms grew slick with sweat. For a moment, she forgot where she was, half expecting to feel Alma breathing beside her. The empty space on the mattress reminded her. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the others, and stepped outside into the pale pre-dawn light. Mist hugged the ground. The sky above was a thin, bruised gray. The world felt fragile, as if one wrong movement might shatter it entirely. Her bare feet carried her toward the buried shed before she could talk herself out of it. The hum returned, gentler now. Not a demand, an invitation. Ada stopped at the edge of the patch. Her breath formed clouds in the cold air. The ground beneath her looked the same as it always did, dry, flat, stubbornly bare. But as she watched, something small caught her eye. Two faint lines, parallel, pressing into the soil, as if two bodies had been laid there side by side. Ada knelt, her hand trembling as she hovered it above the earth. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I remember." "I won't stop remembering." The hum faded. The ground stilled. And somewhere deep beneath, where bone and dirt and forgotten voices slept together, something settled. Not at peace, but quieter. For now, there are stories the land refuses to release, no matter how many times men try to bury them. Hollow Ford changed hands after Elijah Hollow grew old and mean enough that even his own blood wanted nothing to do with him. New owners arrived, broke down the cabins, repainted the house, replanted the fields. They paved new paths, moved fences, demolished the remains of old structures, gave the place a new name. But they never built over that one patch of ground. They tried, once. A later owner, unaware or pretending to be ordered a storage shed, built directly over the barren spot, as he called it. Workers brought timber, laid out measurements, hammered a frame together. By the next morning, the frame had collapsed. Every nail bent, every board warped. The ground beneath the posts had sunk several inches, as though something underneath had shifted in the night, rejecting the weight. They tried again. They failed again. After the third attempt, they stopped trying. Eventually, they fenced it off. Called it a sinking zone. Blamed the soil. Blamed erosion. Blamed anything but the truth. But those who lived closest to it, tenant farmers, caretakers, drifters who stayed long enough to notice patterns, learned the rules the hard way. Don't walk across it at dawn. Don't dig there. Don't sleep within sight of it when the fog is thick. They said, if you stood too close in those hours, when night and morning were still negotiating who owned the sky, you could hear things beneath the surface. A faint humming, the suggestion of bones shifting. Sometimes only, sometimes footsteps circling just below, searching for a way out. Decades after Ada's death, a boy from a nearby farm dared another to touch the bare patch with his hand. Just one hand, just for a moment. Prove you're not scared, they told him. Prove the stories are just tales meant to keep kids in line. He stepped forward, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. His fingers brushed the dirt. It was warm. He yanked his hand back, eyes wide. Dirt clung to his palm in fine, dark streaks, smelling faintly of iron and something else he couldn't name. That night, he dreamt of two girls standing at the foot of his bed, their wrists raw, their dresses stained with a dark, sticky substance. They didn't speak. They only stared, as if asking, "Do you remember us? Would you, if no one had told you?" He woke gasping, his hands still warm. In the years that followed, people would argue about what, exactly, had been found on Ada and Alma at dawn that morning in 1849. Some swore it was just blood from rats, from carcasses from some animal left to rot above them in the shed. Others insisted it was soil from the grave beneath, clinging to them like a claim, marking them the way the land marked everything it refused to let go. The ones who had seen it up close never agreed on color. Some said it was almost black. Some said it glowed red in the right light. Some said it was neither, something in between flesh and earth. But they all agreed on one thing. It did not come entirely from this world, and it should never have touched human skin. Now, when the wind passes through the ruins of what was once the Hollow Plantation, it carries with it more than the dust of old boards and the scent of overgrown grass. For those who know how to listen, for those who've heard stories told quietly at the edges of sleep, the wind also carries the echo of a voice. Sometimes it sounds like a woman's, sometimes like two girls, sometimes like the bones beneath the earth finally learning to speak. And if you ever find yourself on land like that, on a plantation where the ground refuses to grow, where a patch of earth stays bare, no matter how many seeds are thrown at it, watch what happens at dawn. Notice where the mist lingers longest. Notice where the birds refuse to land. Notice, most of all, if you feel a hum in your chest when you get too close. Because some places don't just hold history. They hold the unfinished parts of it. And somewhere, under a forgotten piece of Georgia soil, a twin who chose to go under instead of her sister still lies among the restless dead, not sleeping, not at peace, simply waiting for someone who remembers, for someone who understands that what was found on them at dawn in 1849 was not just what clung to their skin, but what the land finally chose to spit back up for anyone brave or foolish enough to look. If you reached this part of the story, you're one of the few who still hear the voices this land tried to silence. Leave a comment with the name you want to forget. It helps these forgotten stories rise again. And when you're ready for the next truth buried by history, the next chapter is already waiting for you.